you know, my father was a wonderful musician, played the cello. And I had a very old father, so I grew up until I was almost 18 years old with a holy world of classic and romantic repertoire. That's all I knew and that's all I heard. And then through some accidents, you know, I discovered there was something beyond that world. And in searching for my own way into music, also getting a little away from my father's world, obviously, I discovered the 20th century music, you know, and I then was very lucky in joining the Ensemble Moderne, who was a kind of very young group like the Ensemble Intercontemporain, but in a German way, self-organized, you know, searching, looking, experiencing, all that. Meeting all these wonderful composers, Hensel, Lachenmann, Luigi Nono, above all of them, John Cage, Stockholm, you know, I met them all, Lutosławski, Pierre Boulez. That was like, you know, I felt like I was suddenly living, you know, today. I was living today, and that was an incredible chance for me, and I'm very glad I had it. And I think basically I tried, and I'm still trying to use everything I learned from my father, which was a kind of, you could call it old-fashioned, but it was a real, true musical approach based in the deep German tradition. That is what I learned when I was young. And I always tried to use that also for the modern music, because I think the death of modern music is when you start to do it kind of only technical. And on the other hand, the incredible experience with modern music, I tried to make for me the classic and romantic repertoire look alive again in a very different light, because some of the experience you have in modern music you can also find in Bruckner, in Schubert, in Beethoven, above all composers. So I don't think that the urgency to compose, to express himself in music for a composer has changed since old times until today. It's just the vocabulary and the language has changed, but not the, you know, the urgency of expression. So that's what I'm looking for. I've always been attracted to all sorts of requiems, you know, starting with Mozart, Verdi, of course. And then, of course, in the 20th century they're slightly different, because maybe death was so present in the wars. And I especially remember the first symphony of Karl Amadeus Hartmann, which is called Versuch eines Requiems. So he says he tries to write a requiem. Maybe it's not even possible anymore, because the subject of death in the Second World War was so enormous. Ich habe auch von Zimmermann das Requiem für einen jungen Dichter dirigiert. I conducted the Requiem for a young poet by Bernd Alois Zimmermann, which is quite an amazing and incredible piece with choirs everywhere, and really very, very impressive. A screaming piece. And a couple of years ago I also did the War Requiem for the first time. I took over from Rostropovich, who unfortunately died in this time, so he couldn't do it. And so there was an extra reference in that performance. My experience is a kind of really shattering piece as an experience. It's really deeply moving. So I really think that Britten, how do you say, succeeded you know, the trouble about requiems is that if you perform a Verdi requiem or a Mozart requiem, it might touch you as well. But because the text is so ancient, and you can almost, you know, abstract from it and listen to it as beautiful music. Sometimes the public maybe tends to forget about what the whole piece is about. It's about death, about a very serious, maybe the most important and existential subject we can think of, or you know, in our lives. And I think with Britten this is not possible, because the text of Owen is very, very near, and describes very concrete scenes and events of how do you say, confronting death. The main difference between the requiems in the 20th century and before is that they refer to the Latin text, but they always add something, which also text-wise, they add something, because somehow maybe the composers felt the Latin text alone doesn't catch it anymore. Zimmermann uses all kind of different text levels in his piece, and Britten decided not only to use another text, but to use two formations. So you have the big orchestra and the choir and the soprano, kind of dealing with the Latin text, so with history, so with the grand gesture. And then you have a chamber orchestra, and you have two soloists, a tenor and a baritone, and they sing text by Wilfred Owen, who became famous for his poems about war and the experience, being really in the front line. I think the incredible effect of the piece is just in the tension between the two. I like grand pieces, you know, when I have to coordinate a lot of forces, and I like also strong statements. And I like pieces, and you find, of course, more and more pieces like that in the 20th century who have a direct reference to reality, to things which really happened. I mean, I think the danger sometimes is that when we play so-called classical music, you know, even Beethoven or or Bruckner, that we forget about the reality, which always plays a role in every piece of music, but we sometimes tend to forget about that and just look at it as beautiful music without the context. And in the 20th century there are many pieces where you get a little closer to real life, and I like that. And I mean the mourning and the sadness about the victims and the loss of the incredible loss of life in the Second World War is still somehow alive, I would say. I mean, our whole, you know, world of unified Europe, I mean, came out of this experience. So it's still, yeah, it's still alive, I think, and we should not forget. And I think it's very good that composers like Britten and others formed such a strong statement. And we should, every time we play this piece, we should be aware of that.